Welcome to the first lecture in Module 6, and in this lecture we'll cover a background and an introduction to the presentation layer. Just as again a guidepost here, what we're talking about is this section of the architecture. So it's the things that are happening on the browser side, as well as some of the things that are prepared on the web server and delivered to the browser. I've got the network included in this circle that I'm showing the area we're focusing on, but we're really not going to talk about that. We covered that in the last module when we talked about HTTP. So again, it's the client tier and the kind of the presentation logic tier that we're going to focus on in this lecture. Now, the presentation tier involves, as I just mentioned, the presentation logic and the client tier, and it's what the users see in their browser. So it's really how a user interacts with the browser. And a lot of folks think of this as web application development, but we already know that's not the case. This is just one small piece of that. So it takes more than just creating hyperlinks to make a successful website, to make a website that people want to use. There's this notion of the stickiness and the usability of the website. And if you think about it, this is what really can make or break a business that's on the internet, is how good their website is. And how do you define that? Well, that's an elusive thing. We'll talk a little bit about that now. But a high-quality website has a visually appealing layout. And you can actually learn how to do good layouts. We don't have the time to discuss that in this course, but there are courses that you can take related to graphic design and visual aesthetics that could help you in this area. And it's also the navigation structure. I'm sure you've been on websites where it's very difficult to figure out how to get to particular pages or to get to particular things that you were previously able to find on that website. And there's this principle of least surprise that you should follow. If you click on a button, what happens should be what that button describes. So if it says edit, you would expect to see a form pop up if you click the edit button. And surprisingly, there are many websites where that's not the case. So as I said, it's beyond the scope of this course to really dig into those things in great detail, but I think you have a feel for what looks good in many cases and a feel for what's difficult to navigate. One of the things that you can do sometimes is let others experiment with your website to see if they're able to interact, and you can gain very valuable suggestions in that way. So another thing I want to mention is you're going to design layouts from scratch. As I've already said, graphic design skills are something that you may want to use. In many cases, if you're on part of a larger team, a graphic designer is hired, and it's somebody you have to work with. And so they're going to have to understand how to work with you as well and how your website works. So I want to reiterate that there are fundamental design principles that you can learn. And if you look back in time, you'll see these in paintings and drawings and sculptures that are accepted as visually appealing. So here's an example. This is the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. And this actually has something in it called the golden ratio that deals with proportion. And I think proportion is a very important part of web layouts, how things are proportioned. And this has got the golden ratio. Many Renaissance artists used it. And in fact, the Mona Lisa embodies the golden ratio. Michelangelo, Rembrandt, Dali, and others all use the golden ratio in their works of art. Now let's look at something that's ugly. This is actually a funny site. If you go to this, it's called the world's worst website ever. And there's actually down on this page, you can click and it shows the list of errors that are occurring on this website. So the mixture of fonts. This is not a live viewing. I encourage you to look at it live, but you'll see there's animations that are happening on this page. Saying that a page is under construction never happens anymore. You don't do things like that. So you can tell that that's a bad layout, and you can tell that this is a good layout. And how do you capture that? Again, it's kind of, there's an art to this. But this does have this general notion that there's a very clean header. The main content is proportioned 2/3 to 1/3 roughly. It's very easy to navigate and understand this. I'm sure many of you use this site. Here's another one that has a very clear and easy, a business website that has a very clean and clear layout. And so one of the things you can do is you can go and borrow from other websites. So take a look at what you know looks good, what you think looks good, and you can borrow the design elements from that website when you create your own websites. Here is something that is common to do if you're trying to work with a team, is that's to wireframe the website. This gives you some structure. This is basically the wireframe for the previous website that I showed you. You've got this product area. You've got 3 minor areas below it, and you've got the navigation tabs up above. So it's very helpful sometimes to spend a little bit of time wireframing. And the other thing that I recommend that you do is create a navigation structure. So here's a navigation structure that I pulled together for our website at the University of New Mexico. But this helps people to understand where they might be working on particular parts of your website. You can try to use this to determine whether or not your navigation structure is intuitive enough, and if it's got the right elements. One of the things when you build a navigation structure like this is generally the things that are higher up in this tree are the more important elements. So that's one thing you can look for. You don't want some of the most important elements you want your customers to see to be buried, 4 nodes deep in this tree. Now, the presentation tier, the complexity of what's happening in the presentation tier has grown significantly in recent years. There's more and more things that are happening in your browser as web applications begin to look more and more like the typical desktop application. So there's cookies, there's client-side validations, there's JavaScript that's running in your browser, and all of this now has to be managed by the web developer. So even if you don't get involved in the actual design of the web page, it's really important to have kind of a basic knowledge of the design patterns at play here, because you can create a website that's such a mess that not even a graphic designer can figure out how to get that good design into the website. So that's what we're going to focus on in this lecture, the kind of the principles that underlie good graphic design. And that's really how you organize information in a website is what we're going to be focused on. So here are some of the basic design principles we'll talk about. We'll talk about this separation of the structure of a document, which is going to be captured in HTML. So HTML is the language that's used for specifying web pages. But then the language for styling web pages is CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. So these two together, they come together using a design principle that allows it to make it a lot easier for you to maintain a website and change it, modify it, bring in graphic designers. They're used to working with these two as well. So you have to understand how to separate things into these two, HTML and CSS. And then the third is JavaScript. This is what's used for adding behaviors to web pages. When you click a button, something happens. And this is generally it's JavaScript that you use to specify what happens when buttons are clicked. So this is the notion of specifying the behaviors of the various elements on your web page. So this completes the introductory lecture for Module 6.